And so the gentleman that owns this has allowed me to include it in the display. It's just absolutely a phenomenal image. I just saw it and I said I have to have it. So, so he's been so gracious to let me scan it and include it as well. We're talking about that distribution of soldiers and really about what is happening to the families in Tennessee, what they're actually going through as well. All right. All right. So we will also be spending time in that section talking about what Franklin was at that time as well. I know Walter has seen this map. Maybe. Yes, yeah. So this is a hand-drawn map showing what Franklin looked like. So I know it's kind of see with all the different things, but you can see various headquarters and where the Army was. We've got various posts, and of course Fort Granger is on there as well.
Could you point that out?
Fort Granger?
That's Fort Granger.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's north of there?
So you can see the railroad
Okay.
runs all the way through, and so then you got the pike right here.
And then that's downtown Franklin, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep. So Carter House would be south of there.
Carter House is, yeah, further south, but the square is right there.
Well,
Yeah.
the block is.
The block is there, yeah. The block is there. But you can see, hold on, I have my other, we had the orchard here, somewhere around here.
Whose orchard is that?
The Truett House, where we had the orchard, and or the greenhouse and stuff in the back. So yeah, there it is, the nursery over here. So I'll be using that one and talking about when the federal troops actually come into Franklin, what life was like for the people who were still living here. Because at that time, of course, Moscow Carter had left and had come home. So he was here, and what they were experiencing, life with provost passes to go in and out. And so we've got good examples of both U.S. and Confederate passes that were required to get in and out of Franklin at various times.
So small.
Yeah, it was pretty small. It was pretty small. So something that we use the term here quite a bit about the occupation of Franklin. And so something that I've been thinking a little more about is it occupation or is it liberation, right, for some of the people who were here, right? I think everybody had different opinions about that. And so that's something that I've included as well, because there are U.S. supporters in Franklin as well as Confederate supporters in Franklin. And then we also have a large amount of contraband escaping slaves that are coming into Franklin as well, seeking refuge with the U.S. Army. And so we know a lot about that from what's written by the U.S. troops that are here during that time, 63 and into 64. So we'll be talking a little bit also about those men and women who are off seeking a better life. And so this is a contraband camp, not in Franklin, but just to give everyone an idea of really what was going on, seeking a different life, and ultimately becoming USCT soldiers for many of them as well. So once we get through all of that, then we'll be discussing Civil War timeline. We'll be covering major battles and talking about Carter siblings, right? The other brothers, their engagements, their connections, but covering some of the major battles. So when our guests come, most of them know about Gettysburg, right? That's usually the one everybody knows about. So we'll be putting that in a little bit of context, as well as Chickamauga, Chattanooga, and explaining how all of that fits together for our guests to ultimately set the stage for Franklin, so they've got a better understanding of what's actually happening. So here we've got a couple of maps showing you really the movements into Tennessee, and then one of our Spring Hill maps as well. So we'll be addressing that and the Battle of Atlanta, and then leading to where they are actually coming into this area. So then, of course, we come to Franklin. So this is one of my faces of Franklin that I did a long time ago. I still find it very helpful to give people a better understanding of some of the men who were actually here. And to put faces with that, because we can talk about numbers and stories and dates and all regiments, but I think sometimes seeing a face, having that connection, can be very, very helpful on tour or when you're going through a display as well. So as we come into Franklin, we're going to be addressing really our major themes. Right? So And this is the cotton, this is the gin house. I think most people have probably seen this image, but I did have it colorized for what we're looking at. Yeah. So when we first started thinking about the museum, very, very daunting to cover all of this time, but almost more difficult was to try and whittle the battle down into manageable sections. So I have so many objects, I have so many accounts, I have so many stories that I want to tell. So what we have decided, this is how we have grouped it. We have made it into 5 sections. The arrival and setup of the U.S. Army, the arrival and setup of the Confederate Army, the Confederate attack and breakthrough, the U.S. efforts to hold the line and the counter-assault, and combat after dark and immediate aftermath. So I feel pretty good. That was, that's kind of, it's the main point. So we're grouping it that way in more digestible things for people who've never heard anything about Franklin to be able to come, but also people who've seen and heard to be able to know what's going on in some of the different sections as well, to allow us to group all of that together. So as you can imagine, I have a large amount of objects. I would have double the amount if I could, but unfortunately, there's only so much space. So hopefully that'll give me good opportunity to be able to rotate a good many things that we can have in and out of all of that. So all the different things on here are actually objects that will be, or images that will be part of the display. So we've got personal effects, canteens, we've got a bummer's cap, obviously 2 different jackets they were both worn at the Battle of Franklin. And then we've got weapons. I'm going to have some swords. I've got firing weapons. I've got artillery shell, as you can see, and we'll have some other projectiles as well. And then on the bottom is actually one of my, I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I suppose you gotta be honest. So this is actually one of my favorite objects in the collection. It is actually a bridle flag. So it flew from a horse's bridle. So it's actually very small. It's about this big. And it was made from silk. And then the stars that are on it are actually punched tin. They're actually metal stars that were punched out as well. And it belonged to a gentleman who was on A.P. Stewart's staff and flew on the bridle of his horse here at Franklin. And it was given by that gentleman to Stanley Horn, and then Stanley Horn gave it to the Carter House in the 1950s. Yes, yes. So it was initially pasted on a board, which, as much as I hate that, I have to say that's what saved it, because if it wasn't on there, it would have just disintegrated. So knowing that I wanted it in the display, and we paused everything during COVID, I was moving forward with object conservation, so I actually had it fully conserved during COVID. So I had that one done, and it's fully removed from all of that. So I had this done, and actually had this jacket fully conserved as well during COVID. This is James Cooper's jacket.
Is that the one that's right there?
Yeah, it is, this one, right behind. And this is William Sari's jacket, and that one's actually in pretty good shape, but I did also have that clean. So I've been trying to do all these other projects over the last many years to make sure as much as we can have ready and available and protected. Yeah.
You mentioned Stanley Horn. Just as an aside, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was the historian who saved the Carter House originally, right?
So he partnered with Dan Robeson, who was the state librarian and archivist, and a couple of other individuals. I think Captain Tom Henderson was also very involved with all of that, and they petitioned the governor to actually buy the house.
Because it almost lost to a car repair shop or something like that.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of the correspondence that Stanley Horn sent to the governor, wrote directly to the governor's office, and they were saying they were going to turn it into a gas station. So who knows? But Stanley Horn obtained the option to buy the Carter House and then got the state to allocate the money. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So very, very thankful for all their efforts. But yeah, he gave that and a few other pieces from his personal collection to the Carter House. So it's been there since it opened in the 50s. Yeah. 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 So another part of this is kind of a selfish, right? If you're the one deciding what goes on display, I try to be very balanced. I try to have as much represented as I can, but sometimes you get to choose stuff that you just like, right? And that's only fair. I think so anyway. If I'm the one doing it, I get to decide a few things. So this is a grouping that will be part of the Battle of Franklin section. And really talking about the immediate aftermath. So the image on the left is a man named Spencer Talley. He's on the left, and John Holman is on the right. And they were both in the 28th Tennessee. They were from Lebanon. And on the top is John Holman's sword. And on the bottom is Spencer Talley's journal. All right? So some of you I know the story of them, but I want to read you from this page in the journal what Spencer Talley had to say. I won't read it all, but I'll at least read a little bit. So this is what Spencer Talley says about Franklin. Our men were mowed down like grain before the sickle. Our company started in this fray with 57 fighting men, and only 8 or 9 escaped death or being crippled and wounded. Captain Holman was killed in the midst of the charge. Leaving the company in my command, we rushed through the locust thicket to the breastworks, where I fell with a broken skull. My vision was impaired, and it seemed that I must climb a very steep hill. The ground and everything I could see was right up in front of me, and I could only be convinced of my impaired vision by trying to place my hands on objects that I apparently saw. I was just recovering from the shock and could stand on my knees some bit before I could stand on my feet. As stated above, we were in a locust thicket, and it was by holding to these little bullet-shattered trees that I could stand and stagger along by holding to them. The moon shone brightly, and I could see the dead covered all over the ground, over which I had to pass in making my way out. Once out of the thicket, I was soon in the hands of our litter corps, who helped me into an ambulance of wounded men. And then a little later he says, the next day I could walk about without any assistance. And I went back to the battlefield to see that Captain Holman's grave was plainly marked and easily located. About a year after the close of the war, his remains were brought back in and interred in the family graveyard, not far from Hunters Point on the Cumberland River. So, in 2014, we received that journal, which we fully transcribed, and we were thrilled, of course, to have it. In 2015, I got a call from a gentleman named Mr. Holman, and he said, hey, I've got a sword that my brothers and I want to donate to a site in Franklin. And I said, okay. I asked what the connection was. He said, well, we're related to Captain John Holman. And so they made their way out here after a lot of talking and visiting and all of that, and they brought the sword. And their story was that when the body was exhumed and taken back to Lebanon for reburial, as Spencer Talley said, his mother did not want to rebury the sword with him, so they kept it out, right? And they grew up seeing it on their grandmother's wall all those years later, and that's what they were always told. So 3 brothers donated it to us, and I talked to them before we did it all, and I said, are you sure you want to give us this piece of your family history? And they said, we can't divide it into thirds. So yes, we do. So they were wonderful. They were absolutely wonderful. So we were able to combine the two, really, that hadn't been together. It was absolutely fantastic. Just a wonderful thing. I've gotten to do a lot of great things in the time I've worked here, but that was certainly a great one. So they will all be displayed together in the case, and it'll be open to this page, which is where he describes where Captain Holman died and where he was buried. Right. So as we finish up the battle, we're going to be talking about where the family was during the battle as well, right? So as the same that we did for the first part of the display, we're going to do that as the battle as well. So these are images, some of the images we have of the individuals who were actually in the cellar at the Carter House. the night of the battle, right? So we're going to be working through all of that. We've got some interesting thoughts and ideas, and I won't get into all of that. But we're also obviously going to be talking about Todd's story in that area in the context of what's going on. And then ultimately his family, because they're the ones who go and retrieve him. And to me, it's almost more their story than it is his story as well, since they're the ones that have to live through that in the aftermath of burying their son and their brother and their uncle as well. So as we progress through all of that, we're going to then be shifting into what I call kind of Battle of Nashville to the end of the war. So we're going to be addressing that. And then we're going to be addressing the post-war and the immediate Reconstruction time. We're going to be talking about the Freedmen's Bureau, the Klan. This is actually a note about the founding members of the Klan in Franklin, the chapter there as well. We'll be talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1875. We've got race riots in Memphis, and we have the first black congressman in the 1870s as well. So we'll be talking about what's going on with all of that, what's happening in Franklin. This is actually in a newspaper that Moscow Carter saved. I don't think he saved it for that reason. His name is in it for something else, and he sent it to his son in California. And so it was saved by his son and his descendants, and they graciously donated it to us just a few years ago. So it's a chance for us to see what was being published in the Franklin paper and also see what was important to the Carters to save and share with one another when they were living across the country as well, right? So we'll be talking about all of those things, as well as the new amendments to the Constitution in the years after the war, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And then, again, putting in context the Carters with all of what is happening. This is Moscow Carter on the far left, and these are two men from the 44th Missouri, touring Carter House. Moscow really was the first tour guide. You do any reading about it, the soldiers are coming, they're talking. He's often the one touring them around and doing that. So we'll be talking about that as well as we're welcoming our guests like he did. And we'll also be using objects that the Carters saved and repurposed at their home to talk about how they were processing and dealing with the battle itself. So if you've been to Carter House, you've seen the limber chest that's there, right, in the museum. I think most people have seen that. If not, a big chest that was used to store ammunition, fuses, gunpowder, all of that. But the Carters saved that from their yard and turned it into a blanket chest. All right, so obviously a necessity, you got to use what you have, and so we'll be addressing that, and the limber chest will be part of the display as well. All right.
That's the smokehouse, right?
Yeah, yep. I've matched up the bullet damage with what's there today in preparation for our restoration as well. So I've taken this and counted out all the stuff. So that's what crazy people do. So we will be talking again about how the Carters fit into that post-war timeline. I think most of y'all have seen Fountain Branch Carter. This, of course, is him after the war. When he passes away in 1871, his son Moscow actually puts a good bit of the property up for sale. So that's actually a little broadside that was for that. And you can see, of course, this is the farm office, but spun around and attached to the L of Carter House. So I don't know how many people realize that, but so where the farm office is today is where it was the day of the battle, but the Carters themselves actually moved it, spun it around, and attached it to the L of the house. So this is the well, and that's where the well is today, if you can imagine the yard, right? So this is actually the farm office, and you can see those bullet holes all through there as well. And then, of course, when Moscow Carter sells the house and moves, he sells about 1896, and then he moves to Tryon and lives there for a number of years until he moves back to Franklin and lives with his daughter right downtown, and that's where he dies, in downtown Franklin on 4th Avenue North, pretty close. Yeah, 4th Avenue North, right? Yeah. So we'll also, of course, be talking about the 1914 reunion and our timeline and discussing those different elements with the veterans and what's happening here in Franklin. Moscow Carter dies in 1913, so he is not there at the blue and gray reunion in 1914. And then we'll be I mentioned at the beginning how we're going to have those freestanding figures and we'll be telling different stories. So part of our tagline for the Battle of Franklin Trust is learn how the Civil War redefined America, right? And our mission statement talks about a people forever impacted by the war. And so we're going to end our time in the museum talking about people who were impacted by the Battle of Franklin. And so that's a place where we can actually rotate different stories as well, a lot easier. We'll be able to rotate objects, we'll be able to rotate stories and information as well. So on the far left is a little bit about a man named Edward Moff, who was a US soldier. He survived the war, but he was never the same. He actually was ultimately committed to an insane asylum, and that's where he perished in Colorado. And then we've got John Adams and his wife, Georgiana Adams, on the other image there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Georgiana as a widow, of course, of the Battle of Franklin. And then we have Francis Marion Cockrell at the bottom. Looks a little different than his wartime photos, but he, of course, serves as a senator from Missouri for many decades and ultimately becomes a public servant after having been a Confederate general. And Frank Carter, right here, he was born enslaved on the Carter farm, but ultimately makes a life for himself, becomes an entertainer, and ultimately dies owning his own property and living as a free man in Nashville. And then on the far right is a woman named Mary Nickel Britt. And Mary Nickel Britt was the granddaughter of Mary Alice Carter. We talked about her at the beginning. And so Mary Nickel Britt was raised really right around the Carter house. Their house, from what Rick tells me, was pretty much diagonally across the street, not too far from where Carter's Court is today. And she grew up right there. It was right across from the Franklin High School, because Franklin High School is right there. And so they talk about students literally going across the street to talk to her about the Civil War and do research for their papers. And so she was alive to see the Carter House become a state historic site. She donated over 50 of the original Carter family objects that we have in the collection today. So really, without her, we wouldn't have near the tangible connections to the family that we do today. And to really end our talk today about kind of what we're talking about, I've got an artist's rendering of really what Carter Hill Battlefield Park will look like once all of this is done. So the new visitor center, of course, is drawn on there. And then our open space that we worked so hard to preserve, Carter House, and you can see south of there, all of that open as well. So all of that is in the works, of course, with Franklin's Charge and our other battlefield partners to open all of that up. So that is our long-term hope. And so to be able to welcome people in the visitor center and then onto the battlefield that we worked so hard to preserve. So, any thoughts or questions, everybody? Yes, sir.
Two things. One, you touched on an item that I brought up here 20 or 30 years ago when
Okay.
we first showed up.
Mm-hmm.
And we first started touring
Mm-hmm.
homes around the
Yeah.
country. And you brought it up with access for little people to
Mm-hmm.
see signs down below.
Mm-hmm.
Well, old guys like me can't bend over to read those signs. Anything that you can do
Mm-hmm.
in terms of signage to get bigger print, somehow higher up on the wall, so that that now adults
Yeah.
can read them,
Yeah.
would be helpful.
We've worked really hard with the design company to make sure that everything that we're producing, printing, putting on the walls falls within what they really consider kind of standard ADA compliance and guidelines. So we're really only putting substantial text in a certain window all the way around. Yep, so that way it's accessible and available to everybody.
That's a thank you.
Yeah.
The other one is what you're doing here tonight. Leah and I have probably been through hundreds of these homes. And museums
Yeah.
all over the world, all over the United States, they would benefit so much. You say, we're going to talk about, I assume what you're describing is what's printed on the wall. Or are you talking about a docent taking people through the museum with a speech or scenario similar to what you've done tonight, which brings home multiples of X's of the understanding and insight, rather than having to walk around a museum and read little plaques on the wall?
I wish we could have guided tours of the museum, and ultimately, I think we will. Like when field trips come through, we're gonna have a guide, or the plan right now is that the guide will be with them to help explain what they're seeing, right? Because I've been to a lot of museums, right? Me too, I get it. I don't read every word of the museum. I never have. The only reason I've read every word of this is because I wrote it. So I get it. Most people are not reading everything, so you need that context. So I worked really hard for the different panels that we have so that they can stand alone, but also make sense with what you're reading in order. We do not, I'm just going to be really transparent, we do not have the budget for audible elements of that, so.
That's a comment
Yeah.
for the future. But
Yeah.
we've been coming here for 30 years. I got more tonight listening to you than I have
Okay.
in 30 years. of
Well,
coming to these
good.
programs.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if there's some way down the road to incorporate that in what's a museum setting, there people will accumulate
Yeah.
and understand so much more than having to read plaques on the wall.
Yeah, I agree. I know reading is not always the greatest way to communicate that information. That's why I think our tours are so effective, because you have that interaction with the guide. You can ask the questions and you can have that. And you get to learn about stories that are important to them that they can actually relate to as well. Yeah, yeah, or a video. That's what, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I won't hear you till
No, it's all good. It's all good. Yes, yes. Yeah, Pam.
Hi. Will there be a video, welcome video shown? Are you going to be doing that? I did.
There
if
will
you-
not be there is no welcome video planned. No.
Okay, second,
Well, the audio-visual components, what we're talking about are really physical things for now, for what we have. So there is the possibility, I worked with them to have points where we can add video in the future. But for what we're doing for this first one, no, there is no video planned.
and are there plans for the little children that come and visit that would make it more engaging? Is there
So-
anything that is kid-centric? Because that's one of the big
Yeah.
complaints we have when people visit, there's not enough for children, not enough for
So
families.
I've had Harvey done, which Harvey is the dog, the statue that's over at Carter House. So I've worked to try and incorporate him and have elements similar to what I did in 2014, but have those elements for younger children to actually stop and do as they're going along through there. Yeah. Yeah.
There's some good news, Joanna, and you kind of alluded to it. Would you take your pointer and show up there where the library is?
This is the library right here.
Yeah, and if you come back this way, all that corridor there, for the first time in probably 125 years, is gonna be an open sight line
Yeah.
all the way to the Carter House.
Yeah.
There are 3 buildings up there that are
Yep.
about to be removed.
Yeah. I thought
Most of
y'all would
y'all
enjoy
probably know
seeing this
this.
at the end, so.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Now, this one does still have the reconstructed cotton gin, which we know we're not going to be doing, but you can just look at the west side of the street. Any other thoughts or questions? I know I covered a lot of material. This wasn't a traditional kind of talk, but at least a little bit about what we're doing, what we're thinking, what we're planning. And so a lot of time and energy, of course, researching and writing and trying to find the right graphics that would be appropriate and make sense for what we're trying to communicate to everybody. So, yeah.
The schedule, more or less?
So the building is supposed to be done around March. Yeah, the building's supposed to be done around March. Right now, they're telling us that we'll be able to hopefully move in at that time. And then then they still have to demo the old building and do the rest of the site work. So the whole project is not going to be done until later in the spring, but the building itself is supposed to be open, fingers crossed, in March. Yeah. So, yeah, so we are, because we're paying for it ourselves, the Battle of Franklin Trust is paying for the museum. We have to wait until the state is 100% done with the building and we get our certificate of occupancy. Then and only then can we begin installing the museum. So it's going to take about a month to install. So we're going to be open in the new building for about a month, and then we'll be able to open the display. So hopefully that'll give us, time to feel out a little bit, signage, directional signage, all that kind of stuff inside, other things that we need as well. But yeah, that's what we've been looking at. So 30 days to 45 days for install.
But you should be done by the 250th anniversary of the.
Yes.
So that's it, yeah.
Yes.
The country.
That is the hope. That is the hope. So, barring any unforeseen issues. But yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. If you want to see anything else or have any other questions, you can let me know. Thank you all so much.